And we're rolling. So how you doing, Bryan?
I'm good.
Good to see you, man.
Yeah.
It's
great.
So you help companies come to Japan, and I want to get to know how you started doing that.
Sure.
But maybe first, like, how did you get to Japan?
Oh wow. Okay.
Bring this in a little closer now.
I'm probably, I probably have a really unique story about how I ended up in Japan.
Okay.
When I was really young, like somewhere between 6 and 8 years old, I was always watching really old movies. Like my mom, for some reason, just had this access to classic Japanese cinema. So a lot of like Kurosawa films.
Oh, cool.
And so, when I was that age, watching movies like The Seven Samurai and Yojimbo and, just this
See
classic,
Rashomon?
just classic cinema, and just like these great characters that were just so different than anything else that you had seen. I just remember I told my mom, like, oh, I want to go there. I want to go check this out. I was a little boy, right? I just wanted to go check out the samurais and, play with swords and everything. And then I think she did what any other parent would do in that case, and she kind of laughed at me, which frustrated me to no end. And I just remember being like really determined that I was going to go to Japan someday. And I think it would have probably ended there, except for when I got to middle school, I had a teacher who was Japanese. And when I told her I was interested in Japan, she immediately did everything that she could to kind of help and support my interests.
Cool.
This is like the mid '90s, so like people know about Japan, but it's after the real estate bubble had burst in Japan and everything else, and so Japanese wasn't being taught in schools anywhere. Like there wasn't, like, anime hadn't come to the U.S. in any meaningful way yet. So it was before all that, so there wasn't really any way for me to get a whole bunch of information about Japan.
And this is post-internet, right?
It's pre-internet.
Pre-internet, okay.
Yeah, this is like 92, 93.
Totally different world.
Yeah. So it's like because of you didn't even know what you didn't know. So it's not even that I didn't even have the thought to go to a library to check out books on Japan. And the school library that we had didn't really have very much informational books on Japan either. But she was just so incredibly supportive and so incredibly encouraging about teaching me some things about Japanese culture and just kind of like really encouraging me to do that. And then when I was in high school, I got a Rotary scholarship. I was part of the Rotary program.
Nice.
And so what the Rotary program does is everything's volunteer. You have a sponsor club that is in where you live, and they pay for your airfare ticket and they arrange for you to fly over. And then your host club will have volunteers. Volunteer families that will host you as a host student, as an exchange student.
Oh, wow.
And the host club will arrange the school for you to go to. They take care of all the logistics and everything else. And so for the student, you don't pay anything out of pocket except for an insurance policy to make sure you're healthy while you're abroad.
Yeah.
And you get to go to school internationally.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and so I
didn't know this when I was in high school, or I would have done it.
Yeah, well, and I kind of fell into it because, like, I remember I grew up in a very rural part of California, about 2 hours south of San Francisco.
Okay.
And I was walking home, and where the school bus would drop me off, I still had to walk like a mile or so to get
That's rural,
to home.
Yeah.
And my grandfather would happen to be in the area and pick me up and give me a ride most days. And I remember I was telling him one of the days that he picked me up, I was like, hey, do you mind if you take me to the mall after we drop my stuff off? I need to like pick up some job applications. He's like, what do you need a job for? And I was like, well, I need to save up money to go to Japan. So I can. He's like, you're that serious about going? I'm like, yeah. Like if I don't do it now, when am I ever going to do it?
Exactly.
Yeah. And so he's the one who encouraged me to get involved in the Rotary program, which I did, and then I ended up going to Yamaguchi Prefecture, Southern Honshu, and it was an extreme experience in every essence of the word. It was my first exposure to Japan. I'd been to like a parts of Mexico and everything else as a child, so it wasn't exactly my first time visiting international country, but it was definitely a first time in a country where you couldn't read everything. I didn't speak or really understand any Japanese when I first came.
Well, and if you go to like Mexico, you can pretty much pick up stuff.
Exactly.
Because it's written in the same alphabet, basically, without the tilde and stuff.
Yeah.
Even when I was in Denmark, I could read stuff.
Yeah. I mean, well, and plus too, like, in California, like, my best friend growing up was Mexican. And so I listened to all of his family speak Spanish all the time. And I had started to pick up. So I was badly conversant in Spanish at that time. And it was really funny when I came back to California after my year as a study abroad, I started talking to my friend's father in Spanish. And I ended in Japanese. And I hadn't even realized that I had switched from Spanish to Japanese because the Japanese had just rewritten all of the Spanish. And so now I can still kind of understand Spanish, but I can't speak any of it to save my life.
Yeah, like I studied Spanish before I studied Japanese. And the good thing about that was the vowels are similar.
Yeah.
But that's about it. Yeah. And I heard words like mañana is tomorrow in Spanish, but mañana, they were talking about like, you know, we're going here. And another guy said, mañana. I was like, mañana? It means we won't make it in time. But
Yeah.
So there were those false cognates, but yeah, at least it gets your brain working, you know?
Yeah. And yeah, that experience and the experience that I had with Rotary was really interesting because because the way that Rotary clubs work is you have an annual executive committee that runs the club. So you have a president, a vice president, a secretary, and a treasurer, like most volunteer organizations, right? And it changes every year. And apparently the previous president of the host club had signed them up to host me, but then they couldn't find anyone that wanted to be a host family.
Oh, wow.
And there's a deeper story for this. Like there's been a couple other times where other Rotary clubs had tried to host students from America in the past. The city I was staying in, there was also a military base, and at the time, the relations between the military base and the public were really, really bad.
Yeah, that's happened.
Yeah, and so there wasn't really any design. There wasn't anyone that really was putting themselves forward to act as a host family. And so even before, when I was supposed to come over, I didn't find out until like a month before I was supposed to get on the plane that I was actually coming to Japan. So I didn't study any Japanese before I came because like the coordinator literally told me, he's like, I wish I could tell you to start studying Japanese, but I don't know if you should because I don't know if you're going to go because we're having a really hard time confirming your host family. And then what ended up happening is though all of the executive committee ended up having to be the host families for me. And especially in Japan, it's a really big deal to invite someone to come and stay in your house.
Yes.
And my host families did it with the best grace that they could. Some of them didn't want me there. Some of them were very reluctantly happy to have me there. Some of them were ecstatic to have me there. And so you kind of just go through the whole gamut of reactions. And of course, I was also not an easy person to have in your house because I didn't really speak the language.
Were you this tall when
I was
you were
this tall?
How tall are you? Sorry.
I'm 6'5".
6'5".
Yeah.
So when did you hit your growth spurt and when did that end?
I was always that much taller than everybody else. I was always the tallest kid in every single class that I was attending. When I was in second grade, I was taller than my teacher.
Oh, wow.
So she hated me.
So when you came over as a high school student, was it?
I was like 190 or something. I was already like 188.
You probably stuck out like a sore thumb, right?
Yeah. I mean,
wow.
I was in very rural Japan. Like, I was going to stick out no matter where
anyway,
I went.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was also significantly taller than everyone else around me. That also did not help at all. Because like everyone always knew where I was at any given time. It was like, oh, where's Bryan? Everyone just looks up. Oh, he's over there.
Look up. Yeah.
And thankfully, like my fifth host family, this family, they are called the Shiois. The mom in that family was the most matronly towards me. Like she spent a lot of time with me when I first arrived, and she helped take care of all of these administrative things. And so she actually saw me right away for who I was, which is a 16-year-old little kid who doesn't know anything about anything and is trying to figure things out. And so she really went out of her way to make sure it's like, hey, we need to treat him like a kid. We need to welcome him. He's not like some monster. Like he's a little boy in a giant person's body. And she really pushed her husband to really treat me like part of the family as well. And so even though they were going to be my last host family at the very end of the trip, I spent the most amount of time with them because the dad started picking me up from school and then taking me to karate lessons.
Oh, nice.
And when I was staying there, I'd had difficult relationships with all my previous host parents. And then I just remember one night we were watching TV or something and dinner had been served and my host mom was trying to make conversation and trying to talk to me because she really liked me.
Yeah.
And I was just so used to being ignored by every other host family. I just really wasn't paying attention. I was just watching TV, eating my food, counting down the minutes until I could go to my room. And my host had turned off the TV.
Oh.
And he started yelling. He was like, how dare you? You are in my family's home. My wife was really caring about you. She made you this dinner, and you don't eat most of our food, so she had to make you a special. And he just totally laid into me. It's like, why aren't you taking part in this conversation? And I was just like, I didn't even know she was talking to me. And he's like, wait, what? And I was like, yeah, I was like, well, thank you for getting mad at me because no one's ever even told me what I'm doing wrong. Like, I haven't learned anything. And he's just like, are you serious? I was like, yeah. And so from that moment on, for 3 hours, every single night after dinner, we had dictionaries next to us. Wow. And me and the dad and the mom would sit for hours sharing different ideas about America, hearing different stories about Japan. And I think if I hadn't had that experience with them, I probably would have hated living in Japan.
There's so many rules, and if you work in a Japanese company or even a foreign capitalized company that's populated by Japanese coworkers, they just assume because they grew up following the same rules, and so kind of the experience you had is like they might have assumed that you knew all this stuff.
Not only that, but there's just because I'm so much bigger than everybody else. And I look older because I'm an American white kid, right? And so I look that I'm 5 years older than all the other kids that were in my class at the time. And
so probably assumed a level of maturity.
Exactly. It's like, oh wait, we forgot he's 16.
He's a kid.
He's acting like a normal 16-year-old boy would. He's not acting like a really delinquent 21-year-old. And it was really that family that really realized that and really made this effort to be like, hey, we want to treat you like part of the family. And even now, I was just down there for New Year's and we went and stayed with him. We had dinner with him. Cool. And he treats my kids like his grandkids. It's like this really strong, powerful connection that I'm still incredibly grateful for to this day.
That's a good experience.
Yeah, because and it was really like these guys, like they really took the moment to really stop and ask, like, hey, maybe something is off here. And then once they realized that, we just need to have some conversations and talk to each other, and then suddenly everything else just kind of went away. And even though we didn't agree on everything 100% of the time, we could at least understand and respect the other side's opinion. Yeah. And I think it's because of experiences like that and those moments of clarity that kind of set me up for what I ended up doing, right? Because like right now, I literally try to solve problems for people when they try to enter new markets. So it's like, it's not necessarily the thing that you know about that's going to get you. It's the things that you don't know and the rules that you don't know that you're breaking that cause a lot of issues for you.
You don't know what you don't know, like you said,
Yeah, and so... I don't want to go too far and say like, hey, this is exactly why I do what I do. But it is kind of that realization, how powerful that realization was, and then just how much better my time in Japan became once things started making sense. I mean, and I say making sense with a giant set of quotation marks around there, because we all know that nothing in Japan always makes sense. Yeah. But at the same time, if you at least know the rules and understand the way that you're supposed to behave, you can be a lot more successful and you can get a lot further than if you don't know what you're doing at all.
Very true.
Yeah.
And like I said, the coworkers who just assume, because I speak Japanese, and
Yep.
they just assume that I absorbed all these rules, and they would maybe give me not a dirty look, but they would kind of look at me, whatever, funny, and I'm like, what's going on? Mm-hmm. And one coworker, I had a similar experience, like you said with your host dad. Similar experience. He's like, "You speak Japanese, you should know this." I was like, but I don't. He's like, "Why not?" I said, "Because I didn't grow up here."
Yeah.
He's like, "Oh." And then he was a salesman and he was a really good communicator.
Yeah.
So he would say, "Okay, next time we go into a meeting, the senior person exchanges business cards first. And you've just been going up to random people and giving your card." I was like, oh. Oh.
Yeah.
It's those little things that you don't know that you don't know, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think and I mean, I don't think this is necessarily unique to Japan. Like, we all just kind of make an immediate assumption that, hey, if someone's behaving badly, they're doing it on purpose.
Yeah, that's a funny thing. I see this with tourists all the time.
Yep.
And, if you're on Twitter or X, there's all these different memes of foreigners behaving badly, but they don't know. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is, with Japan, there's the social pressure. Like, people give you a dirty look, and you're supposed to realize, oh, I did something wrong.
Yeah.
But what they see is somebody's looking at me funny.
Yep.
Are they going to take my wallet?
Yes.
Because if you're from New York City and somebody gives you the stink eye, you're like, what's going on?
If you even notice.
If you notice, because it's pretty subtle, right?
Yeah.
And there's like the kind of browbeating into good behavior in Japan, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a really interesting way of putting it too, because especially the younger generation of folk, whether we're talking about millennials or Gen X, or I don't even know what all the initials are at this stage.
I don't either. I think next is Alpha or something. So
yeah, and it's really funny, like, talking to them about how much they hate the same type of corporate culture that I really struggle in. It's like, so that's the thing, is like, as much as I love being in Japan, and there are lots of positives and lots of negatives, there's like everywhere else. Like, Japan is not a magical place.
Yep.
It is a place.
It's not a magical place. It's just a place.
It's just a place. There are wonderful and amazing things. Do I want to live here forever? I don't know. Do I want to live here for a long time still? Absolutely. But yeah, like, I lost my train of thought.
That's okay. It's a podcast.
Yeah. Anyways,
corporate culture and rules, and younger people.
They really dislike the way things are going, and they because the way that they're coming up, they have more access to content that's produced outside of Japan, stories that are happening outside of Japan. And I would say even a lot of Japanese cinema now, it includes a lot more elements from foreign cinema. And so there's a lot, like, there's definitely like major shifts and changes in Japanese attitudes and behaviors. Ever since I started coming here, that's been since like 96, 97.
Well, somebody explained this to me. Ricky, she was on the podcast. She's a director here in Japan. And a lot of these really good shows that are very successful are from Netflix.
Yep.
And they're foreign funded.
Yep.
And they've got foreign influence. And so I was saying, like, I didn't really like this series, but I really like this series. She said, that was a Netflix. And it was, basically a Western drama in Japanese.
Yep.
That's why you resonate with it. I was like, oh.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. The foreign thought is coming in.
Well, I think it's more than that. I think that Japan is isolated, no matter how you look at it. Like, Japan is incredibly difficult to get into. Like, it's very easy to come to because it's very, very modern. It's incredibly accessible. Once you get here, it's very safe and very clean.
Yep. Airports are clean. Trains are on time. All the cliches.
Yeah. But then at the same time, to go beyond that surface level of arriving in Japan is incredibly difficult.
Yes.
Like the predomination of only Japanese in most government offices and buildings and signage and everything else. I mean, there are some signs, but most forms that you have to complete to go about your daily life are not localized.
Sure.
And depending on where you are in Japan, that may be way more true. You might have way less English than than in other places. And so Japan is quite, especially because I think it's only like 30% of the professional community can speak English with any level of fluency. And so Japan is very insular, for lack of a better word. But it's interesting for me to see how much that has changed in the 20, 30 years that I've had some kind of connection to Japan. Like, I remember when I first came here, everyone told me, I don't know why you're starting to study Japanese. You're not Japanese. You won't be able to speak the language. Like, there was this legitimate belief that unless you were born to Japanese parents living in Japan, you won't be able to speak the language.
Raised in Japan, Japanese kindergarten, all the way to high school to college.
Yep.
If you didn't do that,
you're not sure Japanese.
Yes.
And they even have like a separate term for like people who grow up, who are Japanese biologically, but grow up outside of Japan.
Kikokushijo.
Yeah.
Yep. Returnees.
Yeah. And so, I remember that being this really strongly held belief that, you know, because of my DNA, I wouldn't be able to speak the language.
Yep.
And that was not whispered by one person. That was a commonly held belief.
Yes. And sometimes still today.
Yeah.
I'll speak Japanese and people want to respond in English, but it's whatever.
Yeah. And then what I started noticing is, because I came back to Japan after high school, I came back for a year for college in Kansai Gakuin University, which I fucking love. And then I had noticed that they started allowing more non-Japanese people to be on TV.
Yes. So you remember like Kent Derricott, Kent Gilbert, Wiki?
I don't remember the names because I didn't watch. I would be having dinner and then I'd look up at the TV, but I had learned when I was much younger, thanks to my Japanese dad, not to watch TV while you eat and talk to your host family. But you know, like I would see like non-Japanese people on TV. And it was either like one of two things. Either they had found these people at the airport and then brought them to the TV studio to act, and then they were actually dubbing over their voice with Japanese. Or there were people that were living in Japan that were acting as like talent or something.
Yeah.
And they were interviewing, talking about Japanese society. But they were positioning it to where all the foreigners were looking unhinged.
I remember those programs.
It's something about Gaikokujin to nanchara nanchara. I can't remember the name of the program, but it was purposely meant to be it was meant to be a discourse. But what always ended up happening is they preferred to get like foreigners that were really fiery, really spicy, and just talking over each other, and just being from a Japanese perspective really rude and very bullish.
I saw one where there was a woman, and she had a prominent overbite.
Yeah.
And they kept on putting this image of a donkey in the corner of the screen, and that's where I learned the word for donkey, roba. They called her roba. I was like, oh.
Yeah. Because I remember like I was at university in Japan in the year 2000. And when I'm talking and joking around, I like to cut a rug. I like to make people laugh. And I remember one of my teachers was like, Bryan, you should consider like trying out for Yoshimoto. Because you could tell jokes in Japanese. Because back then, like I had a really thick Kansai or Kansai dialect
and
accent.
That's popular. If you're like Dave Spector with, I think he speaks Yamagata.
Yep.
Yamagata dialect, Yamagata Ben.
Yep.
That's hugely popular in Japan.
Yeah, and so my teacher thought it was hilarious because I was always telling jokes. I always had some kind of funny one-liner to say in a heavy Kansai dialect. And he's like, you would do amazingly well. And so he knew some people at Yoshimoto, and he set up an interview for me. Wow. And so I sat and I met with this guy from Yoshimoto, and I did a little skit, did a little presentation, and he's like, you're hilarious, but I can't bring you in. I'm like, why? And he's like, well, first you'd have to go and attend our school, and that would take 8 years. But then I can't guarantee that you would have work. Like, I don't know that anyone would want to hire a foreigner to appear in any kind of TV show for long periods of time. Like, he's like, I don't know that you would have work, and I don't want to see you be in that position. And so he was doing it in a nice way, but at the same time, he was basically telling me, like, I don't know that white people should be on TV.
There's not a career.
Yeah. And so, and, you know, of course, it was very dejecting and everything else, but he also had said like, oh, you have to go to our school for 8 years. I'm like, there's no way I'm going to be able to go to school for 8 years.
Well, that's the thing. So I had a comedian, American guy, on the podcast too, and he went to a school, an acting school or comedy school, and they pair you with somebody, and then you start your manzai career, and that's, you work with that person for a couple of years, and then they put you on shows, and they kind of put you out there. But it's very different from the States, where if you're a good actor, you're from the Midwest, and you're good looking, and you come out to Hollywood, and you go out for roles, you're working at Starbucks or an Olive Garden, and then you get auditions and stuff. Here it's almost as if you're a full-time employee of the talent agency.
Exactly. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm kind of glad I didn't go that way. I mean, I don't even know what I have no image of what my life would look like if I had ever gone through. But I just remember like that feeling like stayed with me for a while. And then I remember I was back in Japan visiting, I think Dave Spector was on TV.
Okay.
And I was like, finally. And so it was like, because I was literally able to see the whole process of the evolution of Japanese attitudes towards seeing foreigners appear on TV, and the acceptance of foreigners being able to speak Japanese. Because I remember when I was in high school, I would make people feel uncomfortable because I could speak very fluently. I was speaking very normal because I'm a mimic, so I learned Japanese by listening to other people speak, and I imitate their tone and intonation and everything else. And so
it is funny because it does make Japanese people uncomfortable sometimes. If you speak Japanese, and they're like, "Oh, he understands me."
Yeah.
So they can't.
It's amazing how it's a lot more. How do I say this? In Tokyo, they expect you to speak Japanese a lot less. And they're much more okay with it when you do. In Kansai, you need to be able to speak Japanese to be successful or to have any kind of a life. Like there's fewer people that speak English in Kansai, and the people that, and on average, I would say 99 people out of 100 or 9,999 out of 10,000, whatever the number is. Most people are incredibly happy to hear you speak Japanese.
Okay.
And if you speak Kansai Ben, oh my God, they lose their minds. Like they're so happy that someone can speak at that level. And then of course you have that 0.0001% of people who are offended or who are angry or who are just, how dare this person? Like, I mean, you do have those people. The code. Yeah. How dare you? I mean, you do have, I mean, like you have those kinds of people everywhere.
Sure.
But yeah, most of the time people are just so happy.
Interesting. Well, where I live, there's a bunch of embassies, and people come over, bless their heart, they come over for a couple of years.
Yep.
They process visas, they help out people, and then they rotate to Dubai, or they rotate to Saudi Arabia or Switzerland or China or something, and they're not expected to achieve full fluency.
Yeah.
So when people see me, especially if I'm dressed up, I'm not dressed up today, but if I'm dressed up, they're like, oh, another embassy guy.
Yeah.
And they just think, okay, he doesn't speak Japanese, he's probably not going to learn, and I've been to the same store over and over for years, and they still look at me as if I'm just a temporary, because it's the culture of the little part of town where I live. There's all these embassies, and they're so used to people coming in who don't speak Japanese, and it's just a thing.
Yeah, I remember taxi cabs here in Japan. It's always a hit or a miss, right? Most of the time, people will just sit there and just be very, very quiet, and then I sometimes make taxi cab drivers nervous because I'm a giant human being, right? And then I would say once a month or so, I'll get into the back of a taxi and I'll give the directions in Japanese. And then they're like, oh, you speak Japanese? I'm like, yeah. How long have you been here? And they're so happy to have a non-Japanese person sitting in their cab that can speak Japanese. And they just start telling stories. And they're so happy to be able to like just chat.
I wanted to do Jerry Springer, Jerry. Not that Jerry. Seinfeld.
Yeah. Okay.
Didn't he do like comedians in cars or something? Right. I've wanted to do that in like Tracy and Taxis. In Tokyo.
That's interesting.
That'd be funny, but it'd be hard to get permission to film.
Yeah.
But some of the best conversations I've had in Tokyo are with taxi cab drivers.
For real. I like, since oh God, I mean, the past year, I probably had 4 or 5 conversations with a taxi cab driver, and I got out of my taxi cab literally feeling so much better about whatever else was going on. Even if it's just a random conversation.
Yeah.
Like I remember I was flying back from China, and I was so glad to be back in Tokyo after this business trip. And I sat down, and it was this young cat. I mean, he was probably 32, 33.
Ooh, that's young for a taxi driver in Japan, yeah.
And he picked me up from the airport. I was driving me home, and we just started chatting. And he was just like, "Oh, are you coming home? Or are you going somewhere?" Like, so he already. I was like, "Oh, I'm already giving you a thumbs up. You are assuming I live here." Like,
cool.
Wow. Like, okay, you get a 5-star rating if I could give you a 5-star rating, my friend. And then just we were just talking story. And he was telling me about how his daughter, and like he kind of wants his daughter, he hopes his daughter is going to learn English because his daughter is like 2, And he's like, "Oh, do I have kids? How do I do that?" And he was just like a normal conversation you'd had with an old friend.
I love those.
Yeah, and it was literally, I got off, he dropped me off, and I was just like, it's a damn good conversation. And I was literally happier than I was when I got into the cab.
Well, I think because they see so many people, and it can't be an easy job.
Yeah.
And I have seen people mistreat taxi drivers.
Yeah, of course.
And it really horrifies me when they do it. Because, like, this person, you've put your life in this person's hands.
Yeah.
And then you mistreat them.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't make sense.
That's the smartest move there,
But I think if you treat them like another human being,
yeah,
and just talk to them like another human being, I think they really appreciate that.
It's amazing how often that works. Yeah.
And it works everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do have one funny story. This is years ago in the 90s. I came in 1990 the first time.
Wow.
For 10 years, yeah.
Okay.
And so I'm dating myself here. But I got in a taxi one time, and this guy was older, and he spoke a little English. He's like, "Where are you from?" "From the States." He's like, "I love Americans." "Oh, thank you." And he said, "I was a prisoner of war during World War II."
Jesus.
And I was like, "Where's this going?"
Oh, no.
And he said, "The Americans really treated me really well."
Yeah.
I didn't expect that.
Yeah.
And same thing. When I got out of the taxi, I was like, "Wow."
Yeah.
I really enjoyed talking to him. He was so cool.
Yeah. That's an amazing story.
It went from like scary to like, oh, this is a cool dude.
Yeah.
You know, and then he's like, yeah, I came back, and I think it was in the Philippines or something.
Sure.
He was a POW. And he came back, and he's like, yeah, then I went to work, and I worked for this company for all these years. I retired, and I got bored. I became a taxi driver.
Wow.
And he's like, I just love,
chatting with people.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
But it didn't. I didn't think it was going to be a good conversation.
Yeah.
And I found, because people always ask me, like, how do Japanese people treat you? Like, just like another person now.
Yeah.
You know? They don't hate Americans because of World War II. They don't like. I mean, there's some people who just have like the gaijin allergy.
Yes.
But there's some people who just look at you like an oddity, and some people look at you as another person. And
yeah, I mean, and this. We're about to go deep right now.
Go for it.
But yeah, like it's one of those things where I don't think a lot of people realize how Japanese Japan is. And that might sound really weird, but like as an American, you take for granted how, what's the right word, cosmopolitan our society is, meaning there's lots of influences from other cultures. There's lots of different vibes. There's lots of different things that we borrow and use and make part of our own culture, right? And in Japan, it's very, very Japanese. Like 98% of the population of Japan is Japanese.
Yep.
And the number of people in Japan that have a real interaction with a foreigner. So I don't mean I'm sitting next to one on a train.
Yeah.
Or working with or bumping into them at the supermarket or seeing them at Tokyo Disneyland. I mean like having a real substantive interaction with them, whether as a colleague, whether as a friend, or some type of real meaningful interaction.
Yeah.
It's something really, really small. It's something like only 10% of the population, I feel.
That rings true.
Yeah, and so you have so many people that for most of their lives have almost zero interaction or zero meaningful interaction with someone who's not Japanese. And when they are forced into a situation, when they're going to interact, it's all the stereotypes and all the things that they've ever heard, the positive and the negative side of those stereotypes and everything else that really kind of come to the fore.
Yep.
And so I always try to tell people, whether we're talking about work topics, whether we're talking about personal topics, whether we're talking about just surviving, assume best intentions. Understand that the way that they're reacting might not be the way that you would react or the way that you think is okay to react, but assume that they're doing something on accident instead of on purpose.
And that's, it comes to the thing, like, when people are shocked that you know how to use chopsticks, I think you just explained it to me, because I always thought, well, like, I learned in a Chinese restaurant when I was like 10 years old.
Same.
My brother said, here's how you do it. And I always knew how to use chopsticks. So I come to Japan. Sometimes I prefer chopsticks.
Yeah.
Or I had Korean food the other day. I'm like, can I get chopsticks? I don't want a fork. Like,
Yeah.
But people are genuinely shocked when they see me use chopsticks sometimes.
Yep.
I think you just explained it. They haven't had a substantive interaction with a foreigner, and I may be an oddity to them, or a stereotype, and they look at me like, you use chopsticks?
Yeah.
And I always thought that was weird, and now I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and the other thing too is, like, the way that I look at it is, I think in Japan, most interactions with foreigners that most Japanese people will have will be superficial. So it will be the person who doesn't know how to use chopsticks. It'll be the tourist who has always wanted to come to Japan but doesn't speak any of the language. And so they might have rough interactions with a foreigner for the first time, or they might have an incredibly positive interaction with the first time. And so the reason I always default to, assume best intentions is because you might be their first positive interaction that they'll ever have, or maybe their only positive interaction that they might only ever have. And I don't remember where I was, but I was talking to somebody, and they were genuinely surprised about how well I could speak Japanese. And I'm like, well, I live in Japan. I work in Japan. I have clients in Japan. Japan's my home. Of course I should be speaking a language. And they're like, but not everyone feels that way. And I'm like, yeah, but no, a lot of people do. But there's so many people that come to Japan that don't be able to speak the language, that when people who interact with people like us are so genuinely surprised, it's not because we're weird or freaks or anything like that. It's more just because it's like, oh wow, like, this is my first real, like,
that totally makes sense. And see, I think I've been in a bubble because I worked in a multinational company.
Sure.
And a lot of people had lived in Australia, the US, England. They had worked with foreigners, maybe dated or married a foreigner. And so I just assumed that was Japan. But you're right. If you go out to Yamaguchi, you go to Yamanashi and go to a farm or an inn, that's probably the first time they've spoken to a foreigner.
Yeah.
Because if it is at 10% or so, right, then it would be genuine shock that, okay, I saw something on TV about foreigners, and you don't line up with what I saw. And then they're like, what's going on?
Yeah. So there's that first initial shock, and then that appreciation, and then suddenly I want to sit down with you, I want to talk to you, I want to get to know you.
Yeah, let's have a beer.
Yeah. Let me buy you a beer. Like, I mean, you have, and I think that's the side of things that I love to focus on for Japan, is like, you have to be able to lean into a little bit of discomfort here and there. You have to be able to accept that, hey, Japan is Japan. And if you want to be successful here, you have to play by Japan rules.
Yeah.
Most of the time. And that means that you have to know, hey, these things over here are really important. And if I work really hard to get these small little things right, hey, later on when you are expecting me to do this, and I'm like, hey, sorry, I can't do that. I don't think that way. I don't pick up on these things the way that you do. I wasn't trained to, pick up on all the 140 different nonverbal cues that you're giving me. I'm really sorry. Can you just be a little bit more direct with me?
Yeah.
And suddenly, because they see all the little effort over here that I've done to make their life easier, they're like, yeah. And so that's kind of like the big key to success that I try to tell, whether it's companies coming over, is like, hey, the really small things that you think you get to ignore, because you would in America.
Yeah.
You don't do that here. And that extra little effort that you spend into to getting the small things right gives you a lot of bandwidth on the big things when you need to ask for favors and when you need to maneuver to make things happen. And
you should write a book. The book that I wish that all the foreign managers I've ever worked with had read.
Yeah.
I mean, I worked with some very successful people who are successful in English-speaking countries.
Yeah.
They come to Japan with a product and think, well, it was successful in Canada, England, Australia, America, and even Singapore and Hong Kong, because the English language. Why don't they want to buy this product that's written in English in Japan?
We can talk for days about that. Yeah, we can talk for days. And
I even had a really, really successful businessman that I was working for. Was in Japan, and we were going to be late for a meeting. And I said, we need to leave.
Yeah.
And I said, we cannot be late.
Yeah.
And he looked at me and goes, oh, bullshit. I was like, have you ever done business in Japan? We don't want to be late.
Yeah.
You cannot be late. It's fatal, you know?
Yeah, and those are the things that, you know, those are the small things. But there's also, like, the customer journey in Japan. So, like, we haven't really touched on this yet, but I do consulting, and especially like around marketing strategy and market entry. So Japanese companies wanted to go abroad, or foreign companies wanted to come into Japan. And there's always like a primer that I tell every client that I start to work with. And I always say, like, one, things are going to take way more slowly than you think of. Be prepared to have short-term losses for longer-term wins. And just be prepared that you have to do way more upfront work than you're probably prepared for. And what 90% of the time, what usually ends up happening, people are like, I don't believe you. And they try to go off and do it themselves. And then 6 months or a year later, I get a phone call like, hey, can we still talk?
Remember what you said about...
Remember all that advice that you gave us? Yeah, we were kind of right. I'm like, yeah.
See, I've worked with companies that they have a very short sales cycle. In Japan, it's a very long sales cycle, which sometimes gets interrupted by the personnel shuffle in the spring.
Yep. Oh.
You're talking to the person in purchasing for 6 months. You're sending the contract over, and you don't get a response for 2 weeks. And you're like, hey, Tanaka-san, where are you? Like, oh, I got moved into marketing.
Yep.
Like, what?
Yep.
I thought we had a deal. Like, oh, no, you got to talk to the new person in purchasing now.
Yep.
You start over again.
Start over the whole conversation again.
And I try to explain that to, you know, foreign managers. What I mean by foreign manager is like a manager in the U.S.
Yep.
And they're like, what's taking you so long? And I even had one company tell me, we get a new salesperson in a territory. If you don't have sales in 6 months, we fire them. I was like, in 6 months in Japan, you're just getting your first meeting.
Yep.
And so there's a disconnect. And so it's good that you give them a primer.
Yep.
And they probably doesn't always take. But
well, I mean, it depends on the company. Like, I have some people that I've worked with in the past who come back to me when they start new roles. So it's a brand new company, but the person, my advocate, as I like to refer to them as, they're the ones who are saying, like, we need to work with Bryan. Bryan really knows his stuff. He really knows the market. They already do a great job of getting their colleagues ready for the conversation with me. And then it's also really great because when I give facts that certain people in the room don't immediately agree with, the person on their team is like, no, Bryan really knows what he's talking about. It's like, he told us this, I didn't listen. And then they tell their own story about how not listening to me cost a previous company. And so in that case, it's really, really helpful. But yeah, I would say for a lot of companies, because Japan has this amazing PR company called Hollywood that makes Japan look ultra modern.
Oh, you mean Hollywood, California?
Yeah.
Oh, they do amazing PR for Japan.
Yeah. And so many people are really surprised by how Japan's still stuck in the 1980s in some places. We still have fax machines.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember I was talking to this guy, and he's a sometimes partner, sometimes client, and we were joking around, and he was helping me fill out a form for his company. He was doing his vendor input form.
Okay.
And he's like, okay, what's your fax machine? And I was like, I'm sorry, I don't have a fax machine where I live. And he's like, what do you mean you don't have a fax machine? Where do you live? He's like, where do you live? Where do you live? I'm like, in 2022? Like,
Yeah.
like, God, come on, dude. Like, and so it's that kind of joke, but, like, you can't sign up for Rakuten as a vendor unless you have a landline.
Oh, okay.
And so you can't use them, and the form will recognize that it is a mobile number, and won't let you go to the next screen unless you have a landline. And I think you also have to have a fax line too. It's a requirement to sign up as a seller on Rakuten. Like,
wow.
Rakuten's bigger than Amazon in Japan, and
They're
they don't let you sign up to sell on their account unless you have a fax number.
Wow.
Yeah, like I one of my little side projects is I have a liquor license, and we sell hard to find alcohols in Japan. And I remember I was trying to sign up for a Rakuten account so we could put some listings of some inventory we were trying to clear out, and I couldn't sign up for an account because I didn't have a landline.
Wow. And this is to be a vendor like fulfillment by Rakuten, right?
Yeah,
okay.
I wanted to send them a bunch of alcohol I was going to build the listings and everything else, ship it over to Rakuten, have Rakuten manage everything else.
Okay.
But because I didn't have a fax machine or a landline, I'm not sure if it was I can't remember if a fax machine was also required, but I do know very specifically I had to have a landline.
Wow. Well, I had so much trouble filling out forms because my name is written in, Roman alphabet. And then it says, write your name in kanji. I'm like, okay. So I would write it in katakana, and it says, basically, try again.
Yeah.
We're not going to tell you why, but try again.
Yeah. Oh, God. Yeah, just the mysterious try again.
And then somebody told me, if it says, write your name in kanji, and then it has hiragana, you have to write in hiragana. If it says, write your name in kanji, then it says katakana, you can write your name in katakana. But if you use the wrong one, you get a weird error, like, try again.
I found that if you use the full width Roman alphabet, it works.
Ah, you got to do, like, the double byte characters, right?
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
And sometimes on forms, you got to use double byte, and then for your phone number, you got to use single byte.
Yeah. None of it makes sense.
I'm not a big fan of the Japanese web.
No. And one of my big backgrounds is digital marketing, right? And I struggle with this so much because I like beautiful things. And there is nothing more hideous and ugly than a website in Japan.
Yes.
But somehow it works for Japan.
Works for Japan.
Because all the information that you could possibly think of including is there, even though it's not laid out in nice. It's the one area where messy chaos is allowed to reign.
Oh, it's required.
Yeah. And it boggles my mind.
Yeah.
I've been doing digital marketing for 15 years now, and I've given up on trying to understand it.
Well, if you go to like Nike or Reebok or something, it'll have the company logo.
Yep.
I'm looking like an English website.
Yep.
You have a nice clean logo, and then maybe company history and whatever. In Japan, it's just like splattered all over the place. I did a research/video on this for YouTube, and I'll put a link downstairs. But I think it was because the marketing department was put in charge of the web. And the marketing department was making these leaflets, chirashi.
Yep.
If you go to the supermarket, they give you this leaflet that's got 100 products on it, and it's like
all the information.
Everything, because Japanese are voracious information consumers.
Yep.
And when you go to buy a rice cooker, you need to know every single thing about the rice cooker.
Yep. It's
got to be on the website, or they're like, I don't really trust this. Why didn't they tell me, how much the rice cooker weighs? I've never cared.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
A Japanese consumer would.
And they will ask that question if it's not on your website. Like, and don't get me wrong, like, I understand all of those things, of course. And when I help Western companies set up websites, like we have this whole design process. We go through all the spec information of all the products. We tell them what's missing, and we give examples about what their competitors were doing, so they can see, hey, this is the level of information. But then we make sure that we organize the information so it still respects the branding of the parent company, right? Because even though
That's
that works
important.
in Japan, it's not something I'm ever going to be able to do, and I don't think it's something that we should be doing. I
Yeah.
want to have beautiful things.
But I think that leaflet was just put on the web.
Yeah, no, you're 100%
So when
correct.
you go to Rock, like I like Amazon because you can go to one click buy.
It's controlled. That's
It's
why.
it's nice, but
So
Rock,
Amazon has really fixed layouts. And so the amount of information that you're allowed to edit on Amazon is very, very limited. Like, if you're the brand owner, you can do it, say whatever you want about the product descriptions. You can add a whole bunch of technical information, but you're limited to a certain number of pictures. You're limited to a certain number of videos, and you're limited on what your hero image can look like. And so it has to follow that format. And then you have space down below where you can put additional things to tell like a brand story and everything else. But that above the fold, you land on the product page that is incredibly tightly controlled
It's
at
so
Amazon.
clean.
Yeah, because Amazon's a Western company.
but Rock 10, and I love Rock 10.
Yeah.
Not dissing Rock 10, but their website is so difficult to navigate. I look for a pair of shoes, for example. There's a pair of shoes. Okay, I click on that. I want to get this pair of shoes. And you got to scroll down for 10 minutes before you get to the button to buy.
Yeah.
It's like,
And it's that same philosophy. Like Rakuten allows you to put all the information up that you could possibly think of, because it's that same Japanese mindset. We know that you need to tell your story. We know that you need to tell everything.
everything.
And I was always amazed. Like one of my previous clients, a gaming audio company called Turtle Beach. We had our Amazon pages, which we had spent all this time and effort to optimize all the content. We had a professional Japanese copywriter come in and optimize the language and the verbiage. We had images that we redesigned the images to make them feel more normal and natural to a Japanese consumer. Like your visual identity is very different in Japan versus outside of Japan. So we've done all that process, and we had massively improved the performance of the Amazon pages. And then we were going to open up the Rakuten store. So we are literally expecting it's going to be the same. It's going to look and feel the same. Very clean, very simple, all the information. And it literally looked like someone took the Amazon pages, put them in a blender, hit frappe, took the lid off, and just threw the contents onto the page.
Yep.
It was so disjointed. There was no logic that tracked. We had information about other products and other sales that were happening, that were part of this product, that had nothing to relate with each other. But that worked for Rakuten.
Yep.
And the performance of the pages, even though the volume was smaller because the amount of traffic was going, the performance of those pages was doing better than it was on Amazon.
On Rock 10.
Yeah.
Wow.
It boggles my mind. Like it's one of those things like where it's like every time I think I have a handle on things, I'm like, oh, okay, no, like we can organize this stuff better and make it work better. But then hey, that kitchen sink approach to having everything on that page, like it works and it speaks well to a lot of Japanese consumers. And I remember I got into a really big argument with the people at Rocketship. It's like, we need to clean this up. This needs to be simple and clean and everything. They're like, no, don't. It works.
Okay, well, I used to go back and forth about PowerPoint
Yeah.
with my coworkers. It's another big thing. I had a coworker who would spend days and days on a PowerPoint, and I'd spend a couple hours.
Yeah.
And he was so mad at me. He's like, you didn't put any time. I said, it's got all the bullet points.
Yeah.
And I learned, because I took a class in teaching English, and I would give handouts, and the instructor told us, if you give somebody a handout, they're going to look at the handout and not listen to you.
Yeah.
And my coworker he was so analog, he would have this 30-page PowerPoint, and the whole thing was just a wall of text.
Yep.
And he would print it out
Yep.
and hand it out.
Yep.
And people are taking notes as he's talking and highlighting stuff and taking more notes and stuff. And he would basically go through the whole presentation, 30 pages, wall of text on every page. And I would give bullet points, and then I would explain,
Yep.
okay, this is bullet point number 1, we're going to talk about that for 5 minutes. Bullet point number 2, 2 minutes. Bullet point number 3, this is why this is the best for your best product for your company.
I already know where this is going.
And he was furious with me. And of course, the customers were like, you didn't give us enough information.
Yep.
And it was frustrating for me until I did this research project on Japanese web pages and found out that a wall of text is what people expect.
Yep. They're more comfortable by the wall of text. And So, and this is one of the other things that's really interesting about Japanese communication styles, right? Like, a Japanese person will say one thing, and they're expecting you to be able to interpret 10 different things,
Read
right?
the air. Yep.
Yeah. And so when you're giving a presentation, you want to make sure that they have all the information. If you type out everything that you want them to know, the person who's receiving the information doesn't have to worry about trying to interpret everything that you're saying and doing to capture all the information that you're getting. And so it's one of the ways of controlling for this Japanese need to find the other things that aren't being explicitly said in a presentation. And so it's just like, you can trust me because everything that I'm saying and everything I want you to know is written out that you can take home and you can look at it again. So I'm not hiding anything from you.
And then I found out too that a lot of times the person in the meeting is not the one making the decision.
Oh yeah.
Because in the States, when you make a sales call, you're like, can I talk to the person in charge of purchasing for software? And then you make an appointment with them. In Japan, you get a meeting with somebody, they take that information, they talk to 5 companies, they go back to their boss, and then they make the case for the one they think they should buy. And if you've given them a presentation of bullet points, they're like, what's that?
Yeah, I don't remember.
So I didn't really become an expert salesperson, but my results got better when I put a wall of text. And I would basically go to the marketing materials, copy paste it into PowerPoint, print it up a little bit, and people are like, oh, this is the most amazing presentation.
It's one of those things that I struggle with in Japan. Because like, once again, like, my natural inclination is to do something that is really clean and simple. Because I mean, I present all the time to that same point, a very American style of presenting, where I have a concept up there, I'm gonna explain the concept. And that's how you engage with the audience. That's how you keep them paying attention.
And ask questions.
And that does not work in Japan at all.
No, it's really different. And it's not just presentations or websites. It's like the whole package. Like everything's like that. So.
Yeah.
I can see the wheels clicking. Like, I've hit that wall too. So.
No, I'm just thinking like the really fun things. I mean, my favorite thing to do is, like, I love solving problems for people. Like, that's really the way that I like to talk about what I do. Like, I could say it's marketing, I could say it's consulting, I could say it's market entry, but it's really, I'm like, hey, tell me what your problem is. I'm going to help you solve a problem. And sometimes the problems can be solved through storytelling. Sometimes they can be solved through design. Sometimes it can be solved through a different strategy. Like, there's 101 different ways to solve a problem. And some of my favorite things that I like to do is, a couple of years ago, I was working for this company, and the head of sales was this German guy. He was managing a sales team here in Japan. And I don't know if you know a lot of Germans.
No, not in business.
Incredibly direct. To the point of painfulness. Like, as an Americans, we're pretty direct. And we pride ourselves in being able to deliver information to people in a very clear, succinct way. Ratchet that up and remove all the niceness and softeners that we as Americans put in. How, you might, from an American perspective, be like, oh, that's an interesting haircut. Like, remove all of that. That's a German talking to you.
Wow.
Oh, that's a dumb idea. Why did you think that? No, they're not calling you dumb. They're just being critical of an idea. Yeah, it's just a dumb idea. Like, why would you think that? Please explain this to me. Like, and now imagine that type of communication style managing a Japanese sales team. Wait, sparks flew. And thankfully, I'm not in sales. I was in marketing. So I got to be the peacemaker and just continually make sure that everyone was feeling great. But then the great thing is when I bring the Germans over and we go on sales calls to meet clients. Now, the great thing about having German clients over here in Japan is, for the most part, outside of the communication, Japan and Germany really value a lot of very similar things. Punctualness, extreme attention to detail. So most of the things, they get along great. And it's just that communication style. And it's really funny seeing a Japanese person try to communicate with a German in a German style. which is what, because like they're also being like, oh, if they're going to see respect as me trying to be very direct and me being a direct communicator, I'm going to try that. And the hilarity of a very timid, normally shy German or Japanese person trying to like be very direct, to a German person, because of course the German hears that and they're like, oh, I can re-up this. I don't have to be nice anymore. And just seeing them communicate, and especially over beers, is just, it's wonderful. Boy. It's like poetry.
Isn't cross-cultural communication just a joy?
It is.
I love it. It
is. It gives me laughs. It gives me laughs.
It is great. So what are some projects that are like, what's the funnest part of a project when you take on a client?
Ooh. I think it's the for me, the funnest part is kind of like the very beginning and then the very end. So we always do this thing called like a needs assessment. So we have a client kind of walk us through what issue you're struggling with. Is it coming into Japan? Is it scaling up in Japan? Is it you're considering Japan as a market? Tell us your story. Tell us about your brand. Tell us about your company. And just letting someone who's really passionate about what they're working on tell the story. Like I love that. Like for me, like I really love stories. Like I'm interested in an individual story. I'm interested in a company story. I'm interested in what people are trying to do. And let me help you try to tell that story. And then throughout that initial needs assessment phase, I love like, discovering like, oh, this is really important to them. Or, hey, this is going to be a really fun challenge because of the way they've set up their physical distribution. Or, hey, this is going to be a really difficult thing to do because their CEO has really strong opinions about how much money they should be investing in marketing. And so just being able to identify a lot of those challenges and then put a bunch of recommendations together. And then so being able to kind of really understand where a company wants to go and everything else, I really love that process. And then of course there's all the execution, there's the deployment of the assets, there's the partnership meetings, there's all that other work. It's great too. And then my favorite part is the wrap up where we present. It's like, hey, you told us these were your KPIs, meaning this is how you were going to measure success. This is what you wanted to see happen. Hey, we've done that. We've done that. We've done that. We didn't do that, but we agreed that wasn't important because you saw. And just being able to kind of like sandwich those two things together and then plan next steps. Because I always want things to be, okay, we've done that, now what? Not from a helpless sense of, not from a sense of, oh, I don't know what to do next, but it's more like, hey, what challenge do you want to take on next? So it's kind of like really ramping people up, getting them excited about the market. Because for me, I do love Japan. Like, I think Japan is an incredibly, there's so many amazing people here. There's so many great, kind people here. And there's assholes too, just like there is everywhere else. Yeah. And so to be able to help people to understand that Japan is way more complicated than anything that you're going to see in Shogun or a Kurosawa film or any kind of anime, especially. And that it's actually way better than any of those things that you would see. Like, I love that feeling. And the same thing, like when I work with Japanese companies, helping them go abroad, helping them to like demystify the mystery of what it is, what it takes to be successful outside of Japan. Because the same challenges that I have with Western companies or non-Japanese companies coming into Japan, Japanese companies have the exact same challenges from a different lens when they try to go to abroad, because they are really optimized to be successful in Japan. And those things that make you really successful in Japan make it really challenging for you to be successful outside of Japan.
The nemawashi.
Yeah, the nemo, or the slow pace of doing business, or the sacrificing the short-term wins for long-term results. You just see like a lot of Japanese companies unwittingly lose ground to competitors and everything else because they have to move so much slower. Or there's a whole thing about the way Japanese make decisions when it comes to business. And like, hey, you do all the NIMA washing, to your point, you do all the NIMA washing, get all the buy-in and get everyone aligned, and then you make the decision, and then you have to execute that decision regardless of what happens afterwards. So that lack of ability to pivot and make changes on the fly and to really adapt to the real situation on the market, it's very challenging for a lot of Japanese companies when they first go abroad. But being able to help a company tell their story, become successful in that market, and then take on the next challenge, that is kind of what gets me up in the morning and keeps me going throughout the day.
That's exciting. To see that success, and that it to me, it's almost kind of like vindication. When I've told a manager for 2 years that every spring we're going to have a personnel shuffle, the first time they're like, oh, that's ridiculous. The next time they're like, is that going to happen again this year? I'm like, yeah. And then the third year, they're like, oh, is it time for the personnel shuffle? Oh, yeah. So who's the new person in charge of purchasing? You know, and to see that, it's kind of an evolution. It's a slow evolution. Some people are very willing to say, like, okay, I don't know anything about Japan. But the ones that I find trouble, and I don't want to be like negative Nelly here, but like the ones I find troubling are the ones who are successful at home. And then come to Japan and say, well, we're just going to do the same thing in Japan.
And that's incredibly common. Unfortunately. Fortunately, unfortunately. I guess if it wasn't that way, I wouldn't have very much work to do.
That's true.
So kind of a good thing. But I mean, that's just kind of like, would I be able to be this successful doing this kind of work if I was doing it in Italy or Egypt or somewhere else or Brazil or who knows, right?
I mean, could you be the consultant in Australia for market penetration for American companies? Like, is there a need?
Exactly.
Or Canada.
And
let's go to Canada and sell American products. Like,
it's one of those things where it's like barriers to entry because of language and kind of some shared history and everything else. Like there's so many fewer barriers to entry, right?
But also the isolation of Japan. It's bred a completely different culture that's so alien to everything else. And one thing is, I always kind of cringe when people say, like, I am the director of Asia. So I'm in charge of like Hong Kong, India, or Singapore and China and Korea and Japan. So you're gonna have to have a different mindset for each meeting you have this week. And
well, I mean, I talk a lot with companies who have that, and they usually fall into one of two categories. It's either I'm in charge of all of APAC, but APAC for us is really Taiwan, or APAC for us is really just Singapore. And they do have plans to grow to that level. And then depending on who that person is that's in that seat, and it's like, no, I'm going to hire a local to do the work, and they're just going to report into me, so I'll still be in charge. That is a great model. Someone who can manage the needs of the company and empowers local staff or experts on the ground to execute against the vision, well done. To your point, the person who says, like, I'm a director of all of APAC, and I'm going to be able to single-handedly manage Korea, Japan, China, Singapore, Vietnam, Thailand, Laos, Malaysia, Indonesia. And I've met people like that. And I'm just like, oh Lord, good luck.
Good luck, dude.
So
but I don't want to paint too bleak of a picture. I mean, there's so many successful companies that have come into Japan. I mean, look at Jeep. Jeep is freaking incredibly successful here.
Well, and that's because like you have really clever, sophisticated people that put the right people in place. Like Japan is really one of those places, like, because everything is, if you know how to play the game, you'll be incredibly successful. Like you can't just show up and think that you can do whatever you do in your home market and you're going to be successful. You won't. But if you spend that time to get to know everything, you can do incredibly well. It's one of those things where I always try to tell people it's not actually that hard. But you just have to be patient and willing to learn the process that you have to follow. Like I remember when I was applying to get my liquor license for my side project, everyone was telling me I expect like 6 months to a year for paperwork to be processed for your liquor license. And I was like, long time. But okay, noted. All these other people had gotten their liquor license recently, so I was like, I will listen to you, I would trust you. So I had hired someone to help me get the liquor license because my Japanese is great, but like I said, everything's written in very complicated legalese on websites. So I thought, I'm going to hire someone to help me do this.
Sure. Good move.
Yeah. And she had never done this before. So she was like, hey, I've read through all the requirements. I think I understand it, but let's go have a meeting with the tax office to confirm. So she called up the tax office, and the tax office welcomed us in. And this woman came out, and she was just like, thank you so much for making an appointment. I'm so happy I get to talk to somebody. And she looked at our application, and she asked us all these questions about the business that we were trying to do. And she went through line by line and be like, okay, here's what you want to do. Don't apply for this liquor license. It's too complicated for you to get. You don't actually need it for your business model. You want this liquor license. And hey, on your application where you say this right here, change that to this, because this actually means da 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 da. And she walked us through the entire application to make sure that we got it correct.
Wow.
And she was so happy that my giant person and my partner, who is also an American guy, came in to have a meeting with her, with our Japanese agent that was filling out the paperwork for us. She was so happy that when we submitted our application, she quickly gave my agent a call, and she's like, hey, they forgot this one piece. Normally you'd have to reject it. If you can get it to me within 2 days, I'll still process the application. And then we had our liquor license within 2 months. Wow. We got the liquor license so fast. We weren't ready for anything else in the entire business, because we thought it was going to take 6 months to a year, but we had it in 2 months.
Wow.
And so it's one of those things where when you know the rules, and even if you don't know the rules, you bring someone on that can help you navigate, it goes from so much frustration and bureaucracy and red tape to a breeze.
It's great. You know, and I find that, so I go to the city office for things.
Yeah.
And they're so helpful.
Yeah.
And they will show you how to fill it out. Like you said, you know, put this instead of this, and it'll go through.
Yeah. It's like the anti-DMV.
Bingo.
Yeah, because it's like we all hate going to the DMV in America. Yeah. Like, no one wants to be there. The people who are getting paid to be there don't even want to be there.
They don't want to be there, yeah.
The people that work at the city offices and these government offices, they're so happy to be there, and they are so happy to be like, give me an opportunity to help you instead of yelling at me for me doing what I have to do.
Yeah.
And when you have that behavior, when you have that action, things just move so smoothly, and people will find ways to make your life easier.
They'll find ways to help you. Yeah. Well, and also when you and your partner and your agent go into the tax office, you're actually making their job easier too.
Exactly. She was like, you filled out the application exactly like I asked you to. Guess what? Approved. No notes.
Because that cuts down on the busy work she has to do too.
Exactly. It's like she doesn't have to highlight everything in red and write all these explanations. She's just like, oh, a perfectly put together application, because she already went through all the hard work of highlighting the things that were going to be problematic.
That's amazing. So that preparation.
Yeah.
So I think I've never opened a big business in Japan, so I would think that you would fill out the application and they reject it and tell you what to fix. But the idea of going in first and asking how to do it is foreign to me.
It would be foreign to me too.
I wouldn't have thought of that.
It would be foreign to me too. And if we hadn't been for my agent that suggested it, and I think the only reason she suggested it is because she had never done this process before. And she was just like, I'm not used to this. For you, Bryan, I'll do you a solid. And I was completely taken aback, because normally I would be like, oh, I just fill out the application to the best of my ability. The person on the other end will more or less approve it. Because I think in America we feel like, oh, this is good enough, they should accept it. Enough, yeah. And on the flip side, most Americans would see that, oh, this is good enough, I'll go ahead and approve it. In Japan, it's like, no, you have to have everything done to the letter, in incredibly exactness. And so anyone out there that comes to Japan, over prepare. I can't stress enough how much easier it makes your life, and how much happier the people on the other end are going to want to help you.
Yeah.
How much more the people are on the other end are going to want to help you if you give them everything that they need.
Yep. I start with telling people, bring 2-3 times as many business cards as you think you'll need.
Oh yeah.
That's just the beginning. But
yeah. And know where the closest Kinko is so you can go print more.
Yep. And have a business card case, right? And you treat that person's card like it's their face. And when I met with the most important person in the meeting, I'd put their card on my case. Somebody told me that treat it as if that case is a pillow. And you've put their head on a pillow. It's comfortable. It's nice. And don't write stuff on.
Yeah. I mean, so what I always do is I try to arrange the cards the way people are sitting.
Yes.
So that way I know who's who. But never stack them vertically, because that implies ranking seniority.
Ranking. Ooh.
And so...
I do the...
Yeah.
This is Tanaka, this is Abe, Baba, Chiba, Endo, Doi. Yep.
And then I always leave my case right next to the cards. And so that way at the end of the meeting, I scoop up all the cards and put it right into the case where they can see it. And then my card case goes in the front pocket.
Yes.
Not in the back pocket. No, never in the back pocket. Never in the back pocket.
And you would never just take the card and put it in your pocket, right?
No.
It's got to go in the card case. And this is interesting because there's this, not a cottage industry, but the companies like Louis Vuitton will make these business card cases, and they'll be like I can get away with like a 2,000-3,000 yen card case, but some people will have like $1,000 business card case.
I spent $120 on mine.
I believe it.
Yeah, because of the people that I'm talking to, I'm probably talking to like directors, senior VPs, or exec team, and so I try not to have the most ostentatious case, but it's a nicer case to wear. Actually, get it out. Like, it's nice. Okay. It's solid. It's green, nice. And it's like you can tell that this is a nicer case, and everyone knows exactly what it is. They know why it's there. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and so putting that care into that detail is a big thing.
Yeah.
In Japan, explain this to a person who's never been to Japan, never done business in Japan. It's going to be a struggle, but I think once they pick it up, it's one of those little things that you can do that doesn't require a lot of effort, but it makes a difference.
It's like I was saying at the very beginning, it's those small little things that you engage in that make the bigger things a lot easier. A Japanese person may not comment on the fact that you have a nice business card case, or they might not comment on the fact that you've spent the time and resources to put Japanese on your business card to help them pronounce your name and everything else. But they notice it.
Yeah.
They will definitely not comment if you do something wrong with a business card, but they will notice.
They'll notice.
And so, as much as they will comment on your ability or lack of ability to speak Japanese, they will never comment on your behavior if you're not acting the way that you should. And so just understanding those little pieces of business etiquette before you go into a meeting, or how to write an email, or just how to conduct yourself, or being much more comfortable to jump on a phone call and have a real conversation instead of just doing everything via email. Those small little things do so much to build trust that make everything else so much easier.
And the speed in which you answer an email too. Like I always found after a meeting, they would always say like, "Oh, we don't have any questions." But you get back to the office, there's a long email with a bunch of questions. Because they've had the meeting after the meeting. They put their questions together. They had their delegate send the questions. And I would have people who were over in Japan for a couple of days, like, well, I'm getting on an airplane tonight. I'll respond when I get back to America. I'm like, nope. We got to respond right now because they're judging us on how we're going to do after service once they buy. And it's one of those things that seems small, but it's really big.
And those are, it's like, because Japan cares so much about the relationships, the way that you behave when you're establishing the relationship is paramount. They care more about the relationship than they do about the revenue.
And that's the thing. It's difficult to explain, but like I said, once people start to get these things, or at least trust you, I think that's a major thing too, is like when you go into a new market like Japan, if you trust your advisor, right, then you're going to do so much better.
Yeah, it's, and to this point, when Japanese people like trust you, it's amazing what they will go through because they have a relationship with you. So, with one of my previous clients, we were working with SoftBank as a distributor.
Okay.
So, SoftBank, as everyone may know, is one of the largest companies in Japan. They're a huge company to work with. And if you work with them, it opens up so many doors for online distribution, offline distribution of physical products, right?
Because they don't just have like a cell phone store, right? They have tons of services, banking and
well, and then not only that, but their distribution channels, like they work with every major retailer in Japan. There's like a small number of retailers that they don't have access to, and that's because of the verticals that they decide to play in.
Okay.
With a new client that I had picked up that does smart health devices, it was not an area that they normally had any experience in. But because of my relationship with my contact at SoftBank, he took a meeting with me. I showed him the materials that I inherited from the previous country manager, and he's like, I don't know, Bryan. I was like, I'll tell you what, let me work on this. Let me work my magic on things. Let me come back to you in about 2 weeks. It's like, sure. I redid the entire presentation, because I know what they're looking for. So I did all the things that I know that make him feel better, and I presented that deck to him. I was like, what about now? And then he took it away, and then he's like, hey, you know what? Our team wants to get involved in smart healthcare services now, and we want to do it with you guys. And so they opened up their doors to this company because of the relationship that I have with SoftBank, and because I was also able to leverage my knowledge of him to give him exactly what he was looking for. And it's that type of time and effort and mutual respect that opens up all the doors in Japan.
Big time. And you know what? We're coming up on the end of the podcast. That's a perfect way to end.
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks.